Recently, I had the opportunity to go to the Capcom offices in London to get my hands on and play the final preview build of Monster Hunter Wilds. I played for about 6-7 hours, fought against all of the new monsters that I could, and tested all of the weapon changes, and in the gameplay in the background that you'll be seeing from me as well as a few fellow content creators that have given me permission to use their footage, you'll be able to see how different this build is compared to what you were able to play in the beta tests. And so in today's video I want to talk about my thoughts on the game's performance to try to give you a clear picture as to how the game is likely going to run for you and what you can expect from it, but I'll also be answering a few more questions that you guys have been asking me since I had the opportunity to play it early. Of course, a huge thank you to Capcom for inviting me, and a huge thank you to Rurikhan, RageGaming, ArekkzGaming and NightsideGaming for providing me with some additional footage. So as I said, the topic of performance has been a really big topic in the Monster Hunter community, as truth be told, the beta tests for Monster Hunter Wilds didn't really run all that well. Now they did slightly improve the performance for the second beta test, but it still didn't run very well. They didn't implement all of the big changes that had already been implemented in the build that I played, which made everything feel so much smoother. Now to give you guys an idea, me and everyone else at the office were playing on a base PS5, not the Pro version, and we were able to record both in quality mode and performance mode. So while I am not able to in the video directly compare the two graphics settings and how they look from the same perspective as it is part of the guidelines for the embargo, what I will be doing for you is including a small visual indicator on screen letting you know whether it was recorded in performance mode or quality mode, so that you know exactly what to expect. And I know it's a bit silly that I can't exactly compare the two settings, since, you know, people watching the video can just do it themselves, but it is what it is. So when I got there and I started playing, I initially played on quality mode, which is what I played on for most of the beta test on the PS5, because the performance mode for the beta test didn't run very well, and the image looked all blurry and smudgy, and I didn't like it very much. So when I sat down on quality mode, I noticed some improvements on the quality and fidelity of the image, but it wasn't a huge improvement over what I expected, though the image was overall stable. However, when I decided to swap to performance mode, I was very surprised by how well the game was running. Of course, the visual fidelity isn't as good as quality mode, but the fact that the game was running at a very steady and smooth frame rate was very surprising to me. I was very pleasantly surprised by that because it made for a much more enjoyable experience. I'm the type of player that would much rather play the game at a 60 frames per second but with a lower resolution than to do the opposite. Now I want to state that I don't really have the necessary tools to properly gauge if the game is running properly at 60 frames per second for my recording, but again you can see from my own gameplay recordings and that of many other content creators that when the game is running in performance mode, it is running very smoothly. I should also mention that we had to disable HDR for the game to be able to be recorded on our capture cards, and that some of the footage from myself compared to other content creators may look a little bit different because some of us messed around with the brightness setting, some others didn't, and that is of course going to slightly alter how the game looks. But my point is, from my experience, hands-on experience with the game, on a base PS5 it was running much better than the beta tests, and I was very happy with it because honestly after playing World for God knows how long on the PS4 and PS5 then, while being capped at 30 frames per second, now being able to play a brand new Monster Hunter game at 60 frames per second on console feels like a blessing. Now I don't want to give Capcom too much credit on this because I also want to levy some big criticism, because all of us already know that the beta tests don't have all of these performance updates, so they're not a valid tool for us to properly know how our machines are going to run the game. However, the benchmark test is a tool specifically developed for that same purpose. Reports are coming in from many different content creators, websites, and all kinds of PC specialists that delve deep into how well different games run on different machines with different components. And even though the minimum specs for Wilds have changed, it seems as though the game is still going to have very high system requirements in order to run at a good resolution with a steady frame rate, which is of course going to be disappointing for many players. There's also the fact that Capcom is listing some specs with frame generation on top already included, which is something that I personally dislike. I think most people dislike that, and truth be told, I don't want to throw too much shade at Capcom, especially after being invited to such an event, but when we take a look at also Dragon's Dogma 2, which was released last year, the game also had some performance problems on launch, especially when you were in the big towns. I remember that being a big problem, and I even talked to Rurikhan before the game being out, and we talked about how we had that experience of the game lagging while we were walking around Grand performances. All I can really say in this regard is that I'm providing you guys with the footage that I played so you can have a decent idea of how the game looks on your consoles, and you can do the benchmark test on PC to have an idea of how the game is going to run. We are also likely going to be getting a day 1 patch and a few performance updates as the game releases, because that is exactly what we got with World when it released on console first, and when World released on PC the game also had performance problems and they had to improve the game a little bit. So that is something for you to keep in mind, and if you are on PC you're also going to have the option to download a few performance update mods. And I know some people dislike the use of mods, which I totally understand, but I would honestly recommend you to look into these once the game releases, because in the case of Dragon's Dogma 2 they fixed most of my issues. And as a content creator I always want my videos to look as good as they possibly can be, and I have a pretty good machine. I'm not personally going to be running into most of these issues, but if you fear running into them, that is something for you to consider, or maybe just wait for the game's release and for some videos to come out about the game's performance and then make your decision on whether or not you should get it. The topic of performance, especially nowadays in gaming in 2025, is a very big deal that often leads to some very not pleasant discussions, so I don't want to delve too deep into this, but I know some people have been very curious about it, so I wanted to address this topic with the severity that I believe it needs. Now, one question, and I think this was the most asked question that I received, was, is there a gathering hub in Wilds? And honestly, I have no idea. On the maps that I played, which were the Windward Plains, the Scarlet Forest, and the Oil Well Basin, I didn't see any structure that would be kind of like the gathering hub, though we did have access to all of the facilities, including the blacksmith and also the training area, which you were now able to play within the beta tests. So they are either going to omit adding a gathering hub to the game, because you probably saw this from the beta tests, but you were able to have up to 16 players in your own instance at camp, and this is in a 100 player lobby, so maybe they decided to go forward with that structure, or perhaps they are saving the gathering hub for later on in the game, potentially as something that you unlock after you finish the story, kind of like the guiding lands in Monster Hunter World. I honestly have no idea, but this leads me to another question, which was, how is the multiplayer? Were you able to play with AI companions? And yeah, I was able to play with AI companions. In some main story quests you are actually pretty much accompanied by a companion by default, and you can't really have them not go with you. I believe you can see from the gameplay in the background that I have Olivia accompanying me in the Uthuna quest, for example, but I was able to do the Lalabarina quest and the Chematrix quest both 2 or 3 times, and I used the AI companions to hunt them once each. And for Chematrix I was actually able to hunt it quicker without the AI companions. I was slower with them, whereas against Lalabarina it was around the same time. So if you played around with the AI companions in the beta tests, they're pretty much the same thing there. They're going to deal some extra damage and they're going to provide a lot of utility, but they're not going to perform as an actual player. They're more so there just to help people out that maybe feel overwhelmed with the game, they would like to have some extra assistance, maybe they feel stressed with some monsters, and they're there to provide some additional support. I was also asked about how big the maps are. Now, given the limited time that we're able to play with, I didn't necessarily explore the Scarlet Forest a whole lot. I was able to go around quite a few zones, and I would say most of the map I was able to explore, but I didn't really go out of my way to look for secret areas or anything like that, and particularly for the Oil Well Basin quests, that is, when I fought against Rompopolo and Ursula, we were specifically asked to not go around looking for other things on the map and to try to focus on the target of the quest. And when I was hunting Rompopolo, I actually came across an rurikhan. I spotted him from a distance, but because I was asked to focus on Rompopolo, I didn't go after him, so I definitely did not explore a lot of the Oil Well Basin, but I can tell you that both of these maps are pretty much around the same size as the Windward Plains, and given how big that map is, there's never really been anything close to it in the Monster Hunter series, so these maps are going to be somewhat similar, and again I didn't explore all of it, so that is pretty exciting. I also want to mention that I did somewhat notice that there was a bit of a frosty region in the Oil Well Basin, so I have this theory that there is a connection between the Oil Well Basin and the Ice Shard Cliffs. That is the new snow locale that was recently revealed, much like there is a connection from the Windward Plains to the Scarlet Forest, and you can even go there seamlessly on your Sacred. Now, I'm actually surprised that a lot of people asked about this, given that it is only a small feature in the grand scheme of the game, but a lot of people asked me about the mentals. Did I find any new mentals in the game? And the answer is no. Even in the Oil Well Basin quests, when I fought against Nursilla and Rompopolo, we played them on a new save file which was a little bit more more advanced and they had to set up the quest for us, I looked into the equipment to try to look for new mantles and there were none. There was only one. So we're going to have to wait for the full release to know what the other mantles are going to be. If there's going to be new mantles, I assume there is. It would be kind of weird if you only get a single one. Now, as for the story of the game, how it's going to play out, the way I felt about it is that it is very linear and is always pushing forward into the next thing. From all that I played, it didn't really have a moment where it was, for example, the parts in World where you need to grind up your hunter rank or you need to do progress on your investigations. No, it was always go, go, go. There's always a cutscene, always a new thing happening, always being led from one locale to the next, talking to people and being introduced to new things, very much in a narrow path. But of course, at any point throughout the story in between quests, you're able to do anything. So if you want to stop at any moment in the story, so long as you aren't in a quest, you can go explore, you can go start any of the quests that you have available. You're free to do all of that. But like I mentioned in one of my previous videos, what I was surprised by is how early you visit the Scarlet Forest. Because the way that the story went is you get the tutorial where you rescue the children from the Balharas, and then you fight Chadacabra like you could in the beta test. After Chadacabra, you fight Chemetris, also in the Windward Plains, but right after you finish Chemetris, you immediately go into the Scarlet Forest, which was pretty crazy. I expected us to do maybe 5 or 6 quests in the Windward Plains before we go to a new locale. I really didn't expect it, but in the Scarlet Forest, you then do Congalala and Lalabarina. I don't remember which one goes first. I think it's Lalabarina first as your third monster in the game, and then Congalala next. And after those, you return to the Windward Plains where you fight against Balahara and the Alpha Doshaguma like you could in the beta test, and then you loop back around to the Scarlet Forest, and that is where you get the Uthduna Repel quest. Now, given that the Uthduna is the apex monster of that region, I expect that after it you go back to the Windward Plains, you do a couple more quests, do Raidao because he's the apex of the first region, and then eventually you go back to the Scarlet Forest and actually take Uthduna out. Now, as for how multiplayer is going to work in the story and how you're going to be able to invite players and play the story along with them, I believe it's going to work pretty much the same way as in World, though I am not 100% certain on that. Again, we weren't able to play multiplayer with others, and I know some people like to do story in co-op together with a friend, but I don't have the answer for that right now. Lastly, I want to touch on the difficulty, specifically of all the monsters that I hunted, how long was the average hunt for me, and everything like that. And honestly, I felt that everything was pretty easy. Chemetris, Lalabarina, Congalala, Rompopolo, Nursilla, all of these 5 monsters were honestly incredibly easy. Now, I get that it's low rank, and that of course I am an experienced hunter, I've been playing the game since I've been 8 years old. I get all of that, trust me. But it felt like it was simply too quick. Like, to give you guys an idea, I was able to hunt Nursilla in about 5 minutes, which is absolutely crazy. And thankfully I was able to repeat Lalabarina, because that quest, the second time I did it in 3 minutes, which again is a crazy number. Now, I did have the Chemetris dual blades, which I imagine she's weak to fire, but even then it's such a short time for a fight. I'm not used to these short fights in Monster Hunter this early on into the game. I'm used to these times once I get really good at the game and once I have a really powerful set and you are kind of speeding through some fights. Like, for example, I'm able to hunt Ruiner Nergigante or the Tempered Kushala fight in Master Rank in about 5 minutes. But that's at the endgame and after having a lot of experience with those monsters. So I was very surprised by this lack of difficulty. The only monster that was really hitting hard in my opinion was Uthduna, but of course he's the apex of the Scarlet Forest and that is a repel quest. And usually when it's a repel quest, they do it in a way where you're fighting an uphill battle. You're up against a monster that you're supposed to take down much later on in the game. And I should also mention that throughout all of these hunts I was wearing the default armor set because I simply didn't feel the need to improve my armor. I was doing well with it, so I just used the materials on upgrading and crafting new weapons. Now, there is a chance that the build that I played had been dumbed down in difficulty because it may have been used as a way for media coverage to play through the content and have an easier time against it because they aren't as familiar with the game, they aren't as good, so they might have tweaked the build to make the monsters easier, perhaps have lower HP and deal less damage, so that game journalists, people that are focused on Monster Hunter or that don't know as much about the games, can go through the content. It's just speculation at this point, nothing was told about me in this regard, but the consensus in the room that I was in was that everyone had an extremely easy time against every monster that we played against. And of course, this is only low rank, you are eventually going to unlock high rank hunts, at which point the monsters are going to be hitting harder, maybe they get new moves, and you can have more fun with them. But I really hope that the build that I played wasn't the actual difficulty that they were going to have once the game releases, because to give you guys a picture, many of us creators had to repeat quests to be able to showcase the monsters' moves because we were hunting them too quickly. But of course, I will be reporting on this once I get my hands on the actual game. I likely will have an early access copy and I'll be able to provide a review before the game releases, so you'll be able to know all of this in great detail from the actual release version of the game. With that being said, I want to give thanks to all of you guys because it's thanks to you that I get these opportunities, and of course a huge thank you to Jono for inviting me, and again to Rurikhan, ArcKzGaming, RageGaming and NightsideGaming for providing me some additional footage to properly showcase everything about the game. With that being said, I hope you are all as excited for Wilds as I am, and my name is Dark Hero, thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy hunting!